to first thank Carlos Carter for the introduction, for making it possible for me to be with you this morning. I'm feeling the energy in the room and inspired by your presence. I want to thank the Vice Chancellor, Fred Wood, for welcoming us. After I heard so many great things about Davis, so I think I should have been at Davis, because this sounds like the best place around. And I appreciate the fact they've opened up the campus to us today. And I also appreciate, and I told him this, that he shared his story, that he too had to overcome obstacles to get to where he is today. And it's so important that we understand that not everyone who arrives at these positions of leadership got there because of privilege. Some people got there the hard way, like many of you. And so it's good that he shares that story. I want to thank the leaders, the veteranos of Puente, Felix Galavis and Frank Garcia, for their leadership. You know, you don't build an organization like this and hold it intact for 30 years without lots of dedication, lots of commitment. And when I saw, Frank, I think he too was taken up by the energy, and he tried to run up the stairs, and I started getting a little worried but it's because he's still inspired by seeing young people like yourselves. Because what I see when I look out here is not only the capacity to transform California, but to transform this whole country. Because it is by educating people, by educating this generation, that we will solve the problems facing this country today. And I think, anybody who's paying attention knows the problems are big. We have lots of people losing homes, lots of people with no jobs. The United States economy, they just said, was downgraded to the 5th most competitive in the world, the 5th most. That's pretty sad. We have 2 wars. Now they're talking about sending troops to Somalia, sending troops to Uganda. All that money that we spend in wars, money we don't have to solve our own problems. We've got people with no health care. We've got people losing their pensions, worried about Social Security. And you know what? I'm not worried. You know why I'm not worried? Because when I look out in the audience, what I see today are the future engineers and scientists and doctors and lawyers. I might even see some future honest politicians. And that would really be a good thing. That would really be a good thing, because right now politics is what is our biggest obstacle to solving our problems. Right? It is the bickering, the small-mindedness, it is the ways in which we scapegoat people, and our inability to problem solve constructively that keeps us stuck as we are right now as a nation. So I'm inspired by our future, even if I'm not so encouraged by the present. One of the things I told Carlos when he came up, I said, Carlos, read the bio. It was a little long bio and he stopped, but I wanted him to read my bio because I wanted you to know who I am. I am right now a full professor, tenured professor at New York University. I hold an endowed chair. I've written over 7 books. I've written over 200 articles. I appear regularly on CNN. I'm appointed by the governor of New York to serve on the State Board of Trustees. I advise the Obama administration on their education policies. I write articles in the papers. Before that, held an endowed chair at Harvard University. Before that, at Berkeley, where I also directed a center. Why do I say that? I don't say that to brag. I say that because I am you. I come from the same background you came from. And what I want you to know, is if I could do it, you can do it. One of the good things about being back in New York now, I lived in California for 20 years when I was a graduate student and then a professor at Berkeley, but I'm originally from New York City. originally from the housing projects in Brownsville, the housing projects that are better known for having produced Mike Tyson. As you might know, Mike Tyson didn't grow up the easy way. What's good about being back in New York is people who knew me then see me now, and they remind me of where I came from, which is a good thing, because it reminds me of why I owe, why I have to continue to create that puente, that bridge for others to be able to rise up, because we can't settle for one or two in positions of privilege. Part of what we have to do, those of us who've been able to rise beyond, is to explain how we did it. Because sometimes people get in these positions and say, well, I'm just this smart. You know, I just worked hard. But guess what? There's lots of people who are smart out there. There's lots of people who work hard. But not everybody gets to overcome those obstacles. So let me explain four strategies that I've learned. 3 of them come from academia. So, for those of you who are studious, take out your notes. Because these are things that are going to be valuable to you later on. They got their notes. First one is what the sociologists call social capital. Social capital. Why is social capital so important? Because what the research shows is that when you are connected to influential people, when you are connected to networks, when you are connected to institutions like foundations and universities, you will have access that goes well beyond what you as an individual can do. People who are rich in social capital, and social capital is not the same as financial capital. Not the same. It's not like having money in the bank. In some cases, it's more valuable than money in the bank. Social capital is about knowing the person who gets you that job interview. Social capital is about knowing the person who can refer you to the attorney when you need one. Social capital is about having a mentor who explains to you how things work. Social capital is something that you have to cultivate throughout your life, because it's not just given to you. You have to build it. Especially if you come from an environment of disadvantage. If you don't have parents who are influential, if you don't have uncles and aunts and relatives who are just opening doors, then you have to find a way to create those connections. I had to find that way. I remember when I went to college, I went to Brown University. And like Fred described, I was intimidated when I got there. I was intimidated because all I heard was students who got to prep schools in New England and students who had high SAT scores, and I had never gone skiing before. I didn't know what skiing was. I didn't know what a fraternity sorority was. I didn't know what the prep schools were that they were talking about. Then I discovered that one of my classmates is John F. Kennedy Jr. And I'm saying, whoa, I'm here with the sons of presidents. And here I am, the son of immigrants. Because neither of my parents even graduated from high school. And how did I end up in a place like this? Well, one of the things I started to realize quickly was I need some allies. Because social capital is about having allies. And one of my allies turned out to be an absent-minded professor. Now this professor, his name was Martin Martell. He talked a lot. Every time I come to see him, I knew I'd have to be ready for a 2-hour session. Because he was going to talk. And he was a chain smoker. And this was back in the days when they could smoke in their office. He would smoke in class. In fact, sometimes he would forget if he had the chalk in his hand or a cigarette. So he'd write on the board with a cigarette. When he looked at you, you couldn't tell if he was looking at you because his eyes were going in different directions. But this person, this man took an interest in me. And he said, look, I see potential in you. And it was because of him that I became a sociologist. It was because of him that I was able to get a master's and a bachelor's degree in 4 years. It was because of him that I almost became a Rhodes Scholar. It was because of him that I ended up getting a PhD on a full scholarship to Berkeley. It was because I was willing, I was smart enough to know I needed his mentorship. I could have easily said, this is a weird man. I can't take the cigarettes. I'm tired of listening to his talk. I would rather hang out with my friends. I'm done with this. Sometimes mentorship and help comes in all kinds of unexpected places. You have to be humble enough to know that you need to learn. You have to be open-minded enough to know that you can learn from lots of different kinds of people. And you have to be hungry enough to know that you need it. The biggest reason why we don't fulfill our potential is too many of us are lazy. True? We would rather kick it with our friends than put the time in on the study. We'd rather not spend that 2 hours with that professor. We'd rather go spend it with our friends, especially that cute girl down the hall or guy. The choices we make affect our future. Building your social capital, cultivating those ties. Make sure you know your professors. When you apply to transfer, who's going to write those letters of recommendation for you? If your professors don't know you, you won't have a letter of recommendation. You need to cultivate ties, cultivate mentors. Use those internships to expand your sense of what's possible for you. And keep your mind open, because as you build your social capital, you will also build your access to opportunity. So that's the first one, the social capital. The second one you need is what they call cultural capital. Now, why is cultural capital so important? Cultural capital was invented, or this term, the concept, by this French sociologist named Pierre Bourdieu. And he started to recognize that, you know what, education is not simply about doing well on tests and doing well on exams. That's just the formal part of the game. That ultimately what seems to determine success is how well you play the game. That is, do you know when it's time to pull your pants up? Do you know when it's time to take the hood off your head? Do you know when it's time to speak standard English? Do you know how to conduct yourself in that job interview? Do you know how to code switch? Wow, got quiet. What does that mean, code switch? Well, it's not that complicated. It means that you don't talk to your partners the way you talk to that manager you're trying to impress for the job. It means you don't show up for the job interview the way you show up to the club. It means that you understand that we're being judged all the time, and while it's not fair, and a lot of those judgments are rooted in bias, racial bias, bigotry, knowing that you're being judged can actually empower you so that you do not become a victim of others' judgments. Being able to code switch is like being bilingual. When is the time to speak Spanish? When is the time to speak English? How do we navigate multiple worlds so that we have access to multiple worlds? Cultivating your cultural capital means that you have a self-awareness about who you are and an awareness about how you're being judged so that you're not limited by the bigotry of others. Now, that's a tall order, because their bigotry might be very formidable and deeply entrenched and sometimes denied. They won't even admit to their bigotry. But if you are smart and aware of how you are being seen by others, you can use their bigotry against them. You can use their underestimation of you against them. Because what they don't know is all of the talent, all of the skills that you bring to an equation, but you have to know it. And you have to be aware of how to present yourself to others so that you can convey a sense of confidence, a sense of competence, so that you can manage any situation you find yourself in and not feel out of place. Now I realize that might be a tall order. You say, well, I'm not ready for that. Well, get ready. get ready. Work on cultivating your cultural capital, because you need to feel at home in the courtroom, well, hopefully not as a suspect, but maybe as an attorney. Right? You need to feel at home in the ballroom. You need to feel at home in any situation, because if we are limited to only our communities, and there's nothing wrong with being active members of our communities and leaders, because in fact that's where we need to be. But if that's the only place where we can be, then we can't get access to the resources and the supports that make it possible for us to help others and help ourselves. So part of this means that you have to consciously work on cultivating a broad range of skills, social skills, what they now call social and emotional intelligence. Knowing how to read people, how to read situations, how to figure out who's a friend, who's not a friend, how to work in groups and problem solve. All of these things, the research is showing more and more. If you have good grades, but you don't know how to work with people, guess what? You may not do that well. If you can't control your temper, you may find not only don't you keep a job, but you won't even be married, because nobody wants to be married to you either. If you don't learn to regulate yourself, if you don't learn to manage yourself, and to manage different situations, you find that you're limited. So cultivating your cultural capital means, in the same way as you want to learn more than one language, and everyone here should commit yourself to learning more than one language well. Everyone. Go for 2, 3. Because as you learn more languages, you become better able to have access to a greater part of the world. Commit yourself to going to travel, to see other parts of the world, because we have to be citizens of the world. This is the period of globalization. Don't limit yourself. But you can only have that access. You can only expand those boundaries if you have self-awareness and an awareness of how others are judging you. And all that is about building that cultural capital. The third kind of capital you have to develop, though, is your human capital. Human capital is your skills, your knowledge, your reasoning ability, your ability to process information, because let me give you this sad news right now. Many of you already figured it out. Most of what you will learn in school, you will forget. Some of you already realize that. You forgot. It's coming up next week and you've already forgotten. Most of what we learn in school we forget. Now, some of that is a problem with the way we do school. We focus way too much on memorization, not enough on processing information. Ultimately, what means and determines whether or not you're an educated person is, do you have the ability to keep learning throughout your life? Do you have the ability to continue to acquire new skills, new information, to continue to grow, to continue to expand your repertoire of skills and your intellect? Because it is that continuous growth that will determine whether or not you will be able to maximize your potential as a person, or whether or not you'll get stuck. Right now, during this recession, we're seeing a whole lot of folks who were educated, who were skilled, who are stuck and unemployed. Because they had skills for an old economy. They don't have skills for a new economy. They're finding now that their technology is changing faster, but they're not yet up to it. And the workplace is changing, and the typical worker today will change jobs 10 to 12 times over the course of their lifetime, and it's just escalating. Because there's no security out there in the workplace. And so where do you find security? You have to find security in the development of your abilities as a person. So that you have to commit yourself to lifelong learning, which is very different than committing yourself to your education. It's very important that you get your degrees. It's very important that you do well. We want to see all of you transfer to four-year colleges. We want to see many of you go on to get professional degrees or doctorates. But guess what? My father taught me this, and my father did not have a high school education. There's a big difference between common sense and the sense you need to live in life. And he said repeatedly, common sense is not so common. And there are a lot of educated fools out there. Educated fools who don't know how to navigate the world because they don't have acquired the knowledge and the wisdom, what the poet Rumi says there's two types of knowledge. Some knowledge you gain from books, and some knowledge comes from deep within. You have to cultivate that knowledge as well. You have to commit yourself to lifelong learning, to constantly expanding what you know and expanding your skills, because in that way, not only are you less likely to become obsolete, you're also more likely to be able to have an impact on the world around you. And ultimately, that's the fourth point I want to make to you, which is why all of this is important, which is why I know they're trying to build the energy in here today, because what you really need to be successful is what the anthropologists call agency. Agency. Agency is this very ambiguous concept. It shows up in very unusual ways. It showed up last year when an experiment failed. There was a professor at Harvard University, Roland Fryer, an economist, and he was given a ton of money, millions of dollars to try an experiment. And his experiment was he wanted to use monetary incentives to get kids to read, to get kids to go to class, to get kids to get higher test scores. And he said, you know what I'll do? I will pay these kids. I will pay them to read books. I will pay them to come to school. I will pay them. So he had all this money, and they started paying kids in Chicago, in Dallas, in New York, in D.C. And after a year of paying kids, they decided it wasn't working, so they stopped. Now, before they announced it, I said, you know what, it's not going to work. And they had me in a debate with them, and they said, why won't it work? I said, well, first of all, how many students will you pay? And how long will you pay them? So it's not sustainable. And if you only way we encourage young people to do well is by saying, we'll pay you if you do it. I said, you are actually missing the point. Which we have to cultivate something else within them. But they couldn't get it. So what's interesting is the same week when they announced that experiment had failed was also the week when Jaime Escalante died. Now some of you may have heard of Jaime Escalante if you've seen the movie Stand and Deliver. Watch the movie if you haven't seen it, please. Jaime Escalante was this math teacher from Bolivia at Garfield High School, who had the nerve to think that kids from East LA could study calculus, not just calculus, AP calculus, the hardest course you could take in high school. And the first obstacles he came into were from his colleagues who said, can't be done, not these kids. He said, no, we can do it. And he did it, and he got kids to take that AP exam, and all of his students passed the exam. And they were so suspicious about what happened, they assumed he had to cheat. So they sent investigators, and they looked at all the data and said, no, we're going to retest them. And they retested them, and they all passed again. They said, okay, something's going on here. So then they sent in researchers to come and study what he was doing. And they sent in researchers from Stanford and from Berkeley and from UCLA, and they sat in the class and they watched him and they took notes. And every one of them came out there saying, we don't see it. We don't see anything special. We don't see anything unusual going on here. We don't know how he can get those kids to pass that exam. You know why? They couldn't see what he called ganas. You know ganas are? Agency. He was telling these kids that you are the descendants of people who built pyramids. People who build pyramids can do calculus. He was telling these same young people that they were not limited by virtue of their backgrounds, that they could use knowledge, and then he showed them how they could use that math and how it was being used in rocket science and engineering and other things, expanding their horizons in the sense of what was possible. And then he got them to do something really important, to work real hard, to stay late, to come in on Saturday, and he was there with them, constantly pushing, encouraging, challenging, because he understood that being a good teacher is not making excuses. It's about pushing and encouraging. When he died, there was an outpouring of his former students, doctors, lawyers, professors, people from East LA who had now become successful professionals, all because of one person. One person. He didn't have millions of dollars like Roland Fryer to pay people to go to class or to pay people to go to school. He had something else. Agency. Agency. Cultivate your agency. What is agency? It is a recognition of your ability as a human being to overcome obstacles. It is a recognition that human beings are not the same as animals. Animals have to adapt to their circumstance. Human beings can change, can modify, can overcome their circumstances, can make those circumstances work to their advantage. Problem is, not all human beings understand that or recognize that potential. Some human beings think of themselves almost like animals. Think that they can only adapt, only assimilate, only accommodate their circumstances. That's why you need agency. Where does agency? Agency is what Harriet Tubman had. Think about Harriet Tubman. Oh, Harriet was a woman. She was disabled. She was illiterate. And she freed more people from slavery than anyone else prior to the Civil War. They asked her, they said, well, Harriet, how do you do this? How do you manage to free so many people from slavery? She said, I would have freed more if they weren't afraid. Because she went back repeatedly. She was a cross-dresser. Disguised herself as a man to free people from the South. Totally underestimated by everyone around her. That no one could think that someone like her could possibly be that courageous to defy the laws. She had agency. Dolores Huerta has agency. Why? Because she comes from a family of farm workers. A family that grew up working the soil, dealing with the pesticides, a family that was barely getting by, scraping by. And she, with Cesar Chavez, realized that if workers are organized, they can be powerful. Judge a Harriet Tubman or Dolores Huerta by their resumes. They have that intangible quality. They have that other thing about them, that agency that allows them to transcend circumstance, to overcome obstacles. Cultivate your agency. And where does it come from? It comes first of all from your recognition, from your ability to reflect on your circumstances and take control of your life. Which means you have to honestly look at yourself right now and ask yourself, am I holding myself back in certain ways? Am I with the wrong people? People who are not moving in a positive, constructive direction, wasting my time? Am I embracing habits that are harmful to me? Drink too much, smoke too much, eat too much, lay around too much? Am I cultivating discipline in my life? Think about what you are doing to use your time and what you are doing to plan for your future, because if you don't have a plan, you don't have a future. Things rarely happen to you just because you're good looking and lucky. It happens in the movies. In real life, it actually takes action, it takes work, it takes a plan. Don't waste your time. And don't wait for things to happen to you. Make it happen for you. Agency is that desire, that ability to make things happen for you. And over again, what we find, the people who typically have agency are the people like Steve Jobs. People celebrate Steve Jobs, say he was a genius. Look what he did with Apple computers. Yeah, it's true. But that potential, that agency is out there among all of us. The real question is, are we building it and cultivating it ourselves? Can we see the greatness in ourselves? Will we allow that greatness to shine, to be manifest? And it may not manifest itself in wealth, though some of us would like to have some wealth, at least pay our bills, right? And it may not manifest itself in the most titles and the most credentials, but hopefully it will manifest itself in a fulfilling, productive, impactful life, so that you are good parents, good community members, good fathers, good partners, and so that you can set an example to your children for what's possible. What I'm seeing as I travel the country is people who have cultivated their agency are able to inspire others. I was visiting an old friend he's the head of surgery at the leading hospital in Toronto. He's a Jamaican. I said to him, I saw him, I was talking privately, I said, how does a Jamaican get to be in charge of surgery at this most prestigious hospital in Toronto? He said, well, when I got here, because he went to school in Jamaica. That's where he went to medical school. He said, I knew how to deal with people. And people would come in and they would have ailments and the doctors wouldn't know how to treat them, but I would spend time to sit and talk to them and I would find out what was going on. I became really good at diagnosing their condition. Because that's what I had to do in Jamaica, because we didn't have all the technology, we didn't have all the means to plug them into machines. I just had to use my skills to build relationship, to help people get better. And so other doctors kept calling on me and said, we need that Jamaican guy in here, because he knows how to help people. And everybody kept saying, that Jamaican guy knows what he's doing, we need to bring him in. And before I knew it, I became the head. I don't know how it happened, but here I am. He didn't know how it happened, but the fact was that he did, because he was drawing on knowledge and skills and experiences that were deep within him, that allowed him, when those skills met opportunity, to rise and to shine and to become a person who could truly have an impact. Each of you has that capacity. Each of you has that ability to be leaders, to be agents for change in our community, to be people who can have an impact on the world around you. The question is, do you have the vision to realize it? So many people allow themselves to hold themselves back. Hold themselves back by fear. Fear of failure. Fear of success. And they allow those fears to prevent them from planning. They allow those fears to prevent them from applying themselves. Don't let your fears hold you back. Cultivate that hunger, that ganas, that agency, so that you too can be one that we can call back on and open. So when we do this in the next 30 years, we have to hold this place in the Oakland Coliseum, because there's so many Puente folks out there that is now we can't contain it in an auditorium like this. Let me close with this. I mentioned my father already. My father died 3 weeks ago. And it was a shock because it was unexpected. He broke his leg. You don't expect someone to die from breaking their leg. But apparently, maybe it was a blood clot, something happened, so he died unexpectedly, and that's my alarm saying stop talking. And I reflected a lot on his life and my relationship with him. And I remember when I was 12 years old, I had an interaction with him which led me to believe I did not love my father. My father was harsh. My father would work all the time and always work 2 jobs. And usually when he was home, he was asleep. And if he got up, usually he was yelling. And you didn't want to be around when he was in a bad mood. So I remember at 12, I came home. I had an incident in school where I turned in my paper to my teacher. I turned in early, and the teacher said, what's that? I said, I'm done. And then the teacher says, you're done, well done. And the whole class laughed, ah! And I was one of few people of color in the class. And I was embarrassed. I was hurt, because this was actually a teacher I liked. And I felt he was making fun of me. And when you're 12, you're so sensitive to these things. So I go tell my father, I think I'm going to tell my father he's going to come and straighten him out. I go tell my father, I said, Dad, this is what happened. He says, that's because you should have said you were done. You should say you were finished. I said, what? He's giving me a grammar lesson? I went back to him and said, you know what? I do not love this man. I appreciate that he pays the bills, but I do not love this man. And it took me several years to gradually begin to appreciate him for who he was. Because, as I said before, he taught us the lesson that common sense is not so common. But he also taught me another lesson about the importance of hard work and sacrifice. Because although that he never got to didn't even graduate high school, didn't go to college, he made sure that all 6 of us went to college and graduated. At one point when I was in college, I got a bill for it was just about $1,000. They said, "You owe, this is how much you still owe." It was my first semester in college. I said, "Oh God, where am I going to come up with this money?" So I call home. I said, "Look, Daddy, they say I owe $1,000 still." He said, "Don't worry about it." 2 days later, check comes in the mail for $1,000. Now I knew they did not have that money. I knew he couldn't afford this. I didn't know where he came up with $1,000. But he was so committed to making sure that I didn't have to worry about it, that he was going to send that money. I tore the check up. Because I also learned from friends that if I canceled my meal plan, I didn't need that $1,000 anymore. I could learn to cook for myself. And I would rather sacrifice for myself than have my family sacrifice. But I saw what my message my father was saying, invest in yourself, and he was investing in us. He also taught me one other thing. He said, you can get a free education with a library card. Get a free education with a library card. Yeah, most people don't do it. He did. He was an action person. Every time you saw him, he had a book. Always reading, always reading. So although he did not have the formal education, he was an educated person. He could speak and give toast in 9 different languages, because he liked to drink. Think about this. Most of the knowledge out there is free. It is accessible, especially in this age of the internet. Don't hold yourself back. Each of us are standing on the shoulders of others who did not have the privileges that we now enjoy. That's where we are. Each of you has a father, a mother, an abuelita, a tia, somebody out there who's been pushing for you, who's been hoping for you to get to where you are, even though they didn't get this. We are living out their dreams, their hopes. We are the ones they've been waiting for. Now it's our time. Now it's your time to show that you can have the impact.